This is Dominic Reisig with North Carolina State University, Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology. I want to talk a little bit about tank mixing insecticides in wheat today. There's a number of different pests you may be targeting. Some of them are so sporadic it really doesn't make sense to tank mix. An example of that is true armyworm. Very rare pest, makes a lot more sense to scout. Other pests, it may make more sense to spray them earlier in the year. So an example of that would be aphids. They typically transmit barley yellow dwarf in the fall. Hessian fly should be targeted in the fall. Rarely pays to spray them in the spring. So the pest you may target with tank mixing insecticide is cereal leaf beetle. And we first need to understand their biology. They first pick up as adults in the field, lay eggs in the field. That's followed by a peak in larvae, generally in April. And then of course those larvae develop into adults that leave the field. When you scout, you want to look for adults that are there, and you want to make sure that you're there once those adults have laid eggs. So you're going to want to wait a little bit before you do that scouting. It'll probably be a good idea to get out in the fields maybe the end of this month or beginning of April. Those larvae cause yield loss because at this time the grain is filling in the heads, and of course they're reducing that grain fill. The way that they do that is by feeding on the leaves, stripping away photosynthetic material. In heavy pressure situations, the field can have a frosted or cast look, so you can see a field here in the foreground that's been fed on heavily by cereal leaf beetle, and a field that's been treated in the back. Importantly, insecticides are only effective on the larvae and not the eggs, and rain can kill the eggs, so it's important that we don't spray based on eggs because we want to make sure that we have some larvae out there before we treat. Our threshold is 25 eggs and larvae and 100 tillers, so 1 in every 4. Now applications made here that target larvae are somewhat problematic because if you drive over your field, you're going to experience yield loss due to drive down over jointing. So one of the things that we looked at a few years ago was an IPM strategy compared to a tank mix strategy. So in this particular situation, we treated in mid-March using that tank mix strategy. And then we did end up treating using our IPM strategy in mid-April. You can see that our numbers were checked here using the IPM strategy, but our numbers were not checked using that tank mix strategy. They continue to increase over the season. So in this case, it made more sense to apply an IPM strategy versus a tank mix strategy. We wanted to look at this in a regional basis. So in 2010 and 2011, we compared a number of fields using the tank mix strategy and using the IPM strategy. Now this was a great year to do this study because cereal leaf beetle populations were really high across the region. One of the things we did was a cost analysis. This cost included 4 scouting trips for cereal leaf beetle. It included drive down loss due to treating with an insecticide, and it included actually letting the cereal leaf beetle feed a little bit before we treated it using an IPM strategy, and then other things like cost of the insecticide. Basically, our analysis found that in these 2 heavy pressure year, the tank mix strategy on average saved more money than the IPM strategy. However, I want you to focus on these lines out here. These lines are fields that exceeded 90% of the total cost, and you notice that those dots out there represent fields where the tank mix strategy completely failed. Those growers lost a ton of money because the populations were able to outstrip that insecticide. The residual simply didn't last to give them enough savings. How can we make IPM more profitable? If insecticide price increases, it's more profitable. When cereal leaf beetle populations are lower, it's more profitable. And actually, in the 10 years since we've done that study, cereal leaf beetle populations have been low enough in every single year that IPM on average has been more profitable than tank mix strategies. When aerial applications are used because you're not driving over your wheat, when you can reduce scouting costs, and then of course when we consider resistance management. If we use tank mixing all the time, we're going to develop resistance to insecticides quicker. What I want to talk a little bit about today is cereal leaf beetle populations and scouting costs. One of the things we can do is take advantage of the biology of this insect. So cereal leaf beetle tends to be spotty in fields. There are areas where egg lay and larvae incidence is heavier compared to other areas. So if you're in an area where cereal leaf beetle populations are relatively light, you've gone out and scouted your fields and you found just some pockets of egg lay, I would go back and only visit those areas for larvae later in the season. I wouldn't visit areas where there were no eggs present. The other thing is that cereal leaf beetle populations tend to be spotty regionally. So if your neighbors have a lot of cereal leaf beetle, it'd be a great idea for you to go and get out and scout. If you haven't heard about it in the area, it might be good to go look for eggs, but maybe you can save that second scouting trip later. The other thing you can do is take advantage of this model that was recently published. This model showed that egg densities and larvae densities are really highly correlated. In fact, peak larvae densities start at about 17.5 days following peak egg densities. So if you find eggs out there, you can go back and visit 2 or 3 weeks later, scout and see if they're larvae, and make a pretty good confident spray decision. Again, you don't want to base your decision solely on the presence of eggs, because there are weather events that can wash off eggs and kill them before they develop into larvae. In summary, tanks mixing is cheaper when cereal leaf beetle pressure is high and regionally high, but remember, it's risky. If you have high pressure situations, the populations are going to be able to outrun that insecticide. And we can always make IPM cheaper. Fly insecticide instead of driving over the field, sample 2 times instead of 4 as we did in our study, and then in fields where we have low pressure, we can just visit those areas where eggs are present and avoid visiting other areas of the field where they were not. If you have any questions, you can reach me at ddreisig@ncsu.edu.